Okay, wonderful. So let's say our blessing together. And if you don't know the words, that's okay. You can sing along anyway. We're all muted, so no one can hear you, and all is well. Yella lie 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 lie. Yella lie 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 lie. Yella lie 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 lie. Yella lie 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 lie. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, ידעי די 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 די, yadai, dai, dai, dai. Okay, so just as a reminder of where we are as we get ready to dive in today, we are in the book of Deuteronomy, and we're just a few chapters in, or a few Torah portions into the book. And essentially what Deuteronomy is it's a oration from Moses talking to the Jewish people before the Israelites go into Israel and Moses reaches the end of his life. And so right now we have this continuation of him telling the story from his own perspective. And we find that in Deuteronomy, there's a lot of repetition of things that have happened earlier on in the Torah, although the way they appear in the book of Deuteronomy is often vastly different than the way that they might have appeared other places in the Torah, because this is solely through the vantage point of Moses, whereas the Torah is coming from a different perspective. And that indeed is what we're going to be studying today. We're going to be looking at what are the most quintessential important stories in Judaism. I think arguably you could say it's one of the most important, perhaps not one of the most positive necessarily, but certainly one of the most important, which is the story of the golden calf. And we're going to be looking at how it appears in the book of Exodus versus how it appears in the book of Deuteronomy and what's going on there. So share my screen. Okay, hold on. It was all ready to go. And then when I went live on Facebook, it decided to change my screen. So give me 1 second. There we go. Great. So can everyone see that? Is that good? Yes? Awesome. So, as I said, the story of the golden calf, it's told twice. First appears in the middle of the book of Exodus as the people are struggling to create an identity as a newly freed people. In Deuteronomy, Moses is telling the story from his perspective before setting the people on their way to the promised land without him. And while there's many similarities, as we'll see, there's also some powerful differences. And so what I did is I broke apart the story into a lot of specific sections that correlate with one another. And we're just going to kind of look through that. I know it's impossible for all of you who like to look at the Hebrew to do that while also looking at the English, but I invite you to go back and look at your sheet if you'd like to go back and forth between them. Is there anyone who'd like to read these first verses out loud?
I can do it.
Thank you, Ray.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming, I can't see that word. There's something blocking.
Oh, you're right.
Coming
Yes, let me
down
close
from the
that.
mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink, and they rose to dance.
Okay, so I want us to hold some of the details of how the story opens here. Just any first questions or comments based on this? I know some of us have studied this text before.
I think people are vulnerable when they don't know something or they feel insecure. I think the people were ripe for them to be positively responsive to what Aaron was saying. They forgot what it is to believe in one God, and I can't blame them.
It always troubled me how easily Aaron caved in to the apparent will of the people.
Okay, so there's two things that have been pointed out so far, right? The anxiety that we feel on behalf of the Israelites that you pointed out, Marla, right? Where's Moses? We don't know where he is. We're flipping out. We need something to hold on to right now. We're scared. We're feeling alone. And Aaron just kind of buckling and saying, okay, this is what we should do. And of course, there's lots of commentaries as what really is going on in Aaron's mind here. And there's lots of debate to be had, but just taking this at face value. This is how it starts. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, one of the things is that whenever I read this, when I've read this in the past, it always kind of, it sticks out to me that they aren't necessarily saying God isn't the God that, brought them out of Israel doesn't exist, or that isn't there. Oh, they're not there now, so let's create a new God. It almost feels like confusion because they seem Moses was their connection to a God that they couldn't see. And all of the miracles happened through Moses. And as soon as Moses is gone, they're kind of like, well, how do we connect to God? And they create a molten calf and they say, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so it feels a little less like, let's abandon God, and a little bit more of confusion of like, how do you connect to this thing that Moses connected to help us?
Beautiful. Thank you, Brian. The existential crisis that's going on here for the people. Absolutely. Anything else that we missed that's standing out to you here?
Just a quick note, more modern in terms of slave psychology. When they were in a situation, even here in our history, there was a time when right after the slaves were freed, many of them said, "Boy, we had it bad, but this is worse. I'm ready to go back." And as bad as they had it in Egypt, they didn't come out poor and hungry. They were, and now here they are without a leader, and that's the kind of feeling that this may be bad, but it's worse than. We may have had it bad, but this is worse. I want to go back.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please, Ezra. Thanks, Irv.
I don't know why. I feel like we're having a modern problems right now. A lot of people, were happy. They were going to work. They were living their lives, and then life kind of gets to a halt, and we're still in that. It was weird. I was in Westwood around there, and there's a lot of things closed, and that just depresses me. How used to see a lot of people by UCLA area, and it was just like no one, just I don't know. Life's just different, and I don't know what life will be like after COVID's over, if it will ever end.
So you're making a connection, Ezra, here between the kind of the vulnerability that the people are feeling, the existential crisis that they're going through of trying to figure out, well, what is reality? Where do we go from here? What's going on now? Like, I need some answers with the experience that we're having today. And I think it's a really apt comparison that you're making there. So it's clear from what you've said, from what Marla said, a little bit of what Irv said, all of these different comments, that the focus here is really on what the people are feeling at this moment, this uncertainty that they're going through, which certainly is something we can all relate to, right? And I want us to hold that as we look at the opening to the Deuteronomy section, talking about the golden calf story, which is right below it, and you'll see it's very, very different, the kind of feeling that we get from these verses. Would anyone like to read this in English?
I
Sure, I'll
will.
Yeah.
try. Or oh, sorry.
I can't see everyone, so I don't know everyone who raised their hands, but thank you.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Ezra. That'd be great.
Remember, never forget how you provoked the Lord your God to anger in the wilderness, the day that you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You continued defiant toward the Lord at Harom, so you provoked the Lord that the Lord was very angry enough with you to have destroyed you. I had descended to the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant that the Lord made with you, and I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, eating no bread and drinking no water. And the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone inscribed with the finger of God, with the extent of the words that the Lord had addressed to you on the mountain out on fire on the days of assembly. At the end of these 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord gave me 2 tablets of stone and the tablets of covenant.
Thank you so much, Ezra. So what is the feeling we get from this? What do you take away from this text?
I also think we have a crisis of leadership in both the first text that we read and this one, because Aaron is one against many. I mean, he's got to do something to keep the thing going. So, he chooses some things that require the involvement of many people, and he also delays the conclusion of it overnight. If I were him, I'd be hoping like heck that Moses would amble down the mountain at some point. It's tremendous. And whereas Moses feels betrayed, and Moses is the one who's up there with God, and so he's the one who is directly receiving God's anger and God's ire. And God's probably, as I recall, this is one of the times when God says, I'm going to get rid of some of these folks.
Yes, and we'll see there's some differences between the 2 stories as to what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, it has a very different feel, the second passage. We feel Moses's anger, and we can understand why he's feeling that.
I think of something that if they say that 40 nights and 40 days, but if I've heard that if someone drops the Torah, you have to fast for 40 days. I think that would be kind of challenging not to eat for 40 days and 40 nights. I couldn't live if you don't eat that.
Yeah, it's meant
eating no bread and drinking no water.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. This is where it comes from. You're absolutely right that this is where it comes from. How it's applied if you drop the Torah, however, it doesn't mean starve yourself for 40 days and 40 nights.
This happened at Bethel, by the way, years ago.
Did it?
Yes, it did. In those days on Simchas Torah, we literally unrolled the entire Torah around the social hall on tables.
Mm-hmm.
And at one time, it slipped off one of the corners as it was being unraveled. So the modern context of doing this rather than fasting for 40 days is to pay a fee, which I and Rabbi Lieb did, and a few others who were involved with the whole thing.
Tzedakah.
It's
right?
Yes, a large amount.
Not bad.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways that you could do that today. The idea is not to make anyone's health suffer. That is never, ever, ever something. Like, health always comes before anything else, period.
I think something that bounced out at me, and I've read this before, but I never got it, is he talks about the tablets and the finger of God writing on the tablets. And, I think he's educating the masses to the point, to the view that, this was really something special. And here I come down with these things from God, written by God. And, I had to destroy them because of your behavior. So that sort of makes a little bit of an impact here this time around.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Aaron is not even mentioned in this part of Deuteronomy. Is he mentioned further in Deuteronomy in the story?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of that, Michael. Say that again.
I said Aaron is not even mentioned in this part of the Deuteronomy story. Is he brought up? Is his name brought up in further part of the Deuteronomy story?
So great question. Right. Aaron has no presence here. He is mentioned briefly toward the end, but that's it. Very little mention of Aaron.
I wonder how he escaped. I mean, his sons died for their sin of, of touching the ark, and Aaron gets away scot-free. I mean, no penalty at all.
So the Deuteronomy story takes the onus away from Aaron and puts it directly on the Israelites.
100%. Yeah. So there is a difference as to where the blame is.
And where we're reading here, it says at the end of 40 days and nights, the Lord gave me the 2 tablets of stone. Doesn't say, and then I was so angry, I threw them on the ground.
Well, it will in a second. We haven't gotten that far.
Ah, that's it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm just doing it snippet by snippet because otherwise it's too much all at once. And it's easier to compare them this way. Yes. So, I mean, I put a couple of questions here. I think we've spoken to them to some extent. Is Michael, your question that you brought up about Aaron's role, right? He isn't even mentioned this far in Deuteronomy. He will be later on, like I said, very, very briefly, but at this point, not at all. And yeah, we can question a little bit as to why that is, why Aaron is given this prominent role in Exodus, but later on, really, it doesn't have a prominent role in terms of the blame that's going on in Deuteronomy. One thing that's important to note, of course, is the timeline. The story of Exodus is happening it's a real-time story, at least somewhat real-time, because Exodus is a little bit out of order, which brings some complications there, but it's pretty much like real-time. Whereas the story of Deuteronomy, like everything that happens in Deuteronomy, is Moses retelling stories from the past. Meaning, when Moses is retelling this story, Aaron is no longer alive. So does it play a role there? I don't know, maybe, right? This is the end of Moses's life. Aaron has already died at this point. Why don't we go a little bit further into the text? So it's a little bit longer. Make it slightly smaller. Would anyone like to read just the first few verses here? There we go.
I could do it.
Thank you so much, Irv.
The Lord spoke to Moses, hurry down, for your people that you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely. They've been quick to turn aside from the way that I have enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Lord further said to Moses, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation. But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say, it was with the evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. I'm running out of space. I can't.
Yeah, I'll bring it down.
Okay. Turn from your. Whoops.
Did it go too high?
No,
Whoops. Zoom had a issue. Hold on. Let me share it again. I don't know what happened there. Oh, you know what it was? My Google browser just crashed for some reason. So I lost it entirely. Let me get it back up. That's weird.
Hello, Michael.
Hello.
Where's
Hi.
Sandy?
Sandy went to the Lexus dealership, and I don't know why she's not back soon enough. I don't know. She should have
Well, it's good
returned.
to have you here. Hopefully she'll be able to join.
Yes, I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, I think we were
Right there.
right
Okay.
here. Yeah.
Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and how you swore to them by yourself, and said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. And I will give to you offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever. And the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon his people. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing of God's writing incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people in its boisterousness, he said to Moses, there is a cry of war in the camp. But he answered, it is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of the tune of defeat. It is the sound of song that I hear, the sound of song that I hear. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged, and he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain.
Okay, so there's a lot of details. Obviously, this is a very long passage of the interaction that's going on here. And of course, Rabbi Catherine, we see the throwing and shattering of the tablets that'll appear here as well. So what do you get from this Exodus version that we have? What stands out to you from it?
I'd like to say something that, at least from my point of view, we think of God as this perfect being that is all knowing and all righteous and all loving and so on. And here we have just a peasant in the name of Moses who's telling God, and God is showing his anger, wanting to destroy the people, and yet here we have Moses, this chosen person, telling God, relax, cool it, don't destroy the people. It's so God is imperfect in a sense the way we are imperfect.
Beautifully said, Michael. Yes, we definitely see that here.
Yeah, thank you.
And Moses has to point out to God
Yeah.
that other nations will perceive him if he goes on to destroy them.
Who's this? Oh.
He will lose face in other nations' eyes.
Yeah, it reminds me of other points in the Torah, like when Abraham said to God, Chas v'chalila, God forbid that you would do this awful thing. Like to say God forbid to God is kind of chutzpahdik, right? It's it takes a lot of courage, but it's also a reminding God, this is who you are. Like, don't just give in to anger here. That's not who you are at your best self.
He has to remind God of the promise that he made, that he would make the descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And if he destroys them, he will be violating his own oath.
Yeah.
So does this argument between a man and God raise the man up or lower God down? Does it make God more human, or does it make the man more godly?
I think it makes God more credible, especially when you consider comparing them to the Greek gods, how capricious they were.
I've always been mystified. Moses talks God out of his anger, And then when Moses sees what God has told him he's going to see, he gets angry and smashes the tablet. I don't get it.
That's because we're usually better at giving out advice than taking it.
It should be no surprise to Moses what he sees, because God is so angry he wants to destroy everyone. So I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Larry. And Michael, yours was a really interesting question as well. I wish we had more hours to explore both of them, quite honestly, because it's very deep and really profound. When it comes to like the shattering of the tablets, like there's a few things that can pop out here, right? One is Moses jumps into the role of calming down God's anger because Moses doesn't want the people to be destroyed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Moses isn't himself angry. Right? Like, so maybe he still needs an outlet for his anger. I don't know. Does anyone have any other thoughts about that here?
Well, I think that he just feels that they're not deserving of the tablets. So it's one thing to destroy completely. It's another thing to say, you know, you're undeserving. And so I think that's, to me, that's what this tells me, you know, and he's human, you know, and he is angry and he's showing his anger, but he's not destroying all of them. You know, there's a big difference here.
Right. It's like we talked about the Torah and dropping the Torah and how, you know, obviously that's a very serious thing to do. When I was in seminary and I was learning how to do Hagbah, lifting up the Torah, right? It's a little intimidating doing that the first time. And I had a teacher who said, you know, it's a big deal to drop the Torah. You don't want to do it. But remember, it's better to drop a Torah than a baby. Like, put it in perspective, right? And I think...
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that word. Better to drop the Torah than
a baby.
Oh.
Right. So like Moses is hurling the tablets. He's destroying these tablets. That's a big deal, but he's not destroying the people. The people are what's most sacred.
But Moses feels, I think, let down by the people. Here he's explained that he hasn't eaten or had drink for 40 days, that he went up the mountain, that he did all these things for the people. And here they've messed it up by what they're doing. So I think he's more upset with the people than he is with God.
Yeah.
Do we have a moment for levity, or should I just keep my mouth shut?
Go ahead, Irv, always.
Well, you know, the famous Jewish philosopher Mel Brooks had a statement about this exact thing. They came down off the mountain and he spoke to the people and he says, I have good news and bad news. The good news, I got it whittled down to just 10 commandments. The bad news is, I'm hanging up on the word. I'm spoiled the whole line. The bad news is that lusting after other women is still in. I was looking for the word. I'm sorry, I blew the joke.
Okay.
But we did lose a great Jewish philosopher. Jackie Mason died this week, and
93 years old.
He taught us a lot. He really taught us a lot.
But, you know, I just want to say that what we haven't read yet, or maybe we won't read, is that Moses, according to Michael Sherman, had an ulterior motive for not eating for 40 days and 40 nights because he was on Weight Watchers. You see, that doesn't say that here, but somehow in the footnote I read it somewhere.
I didn't know Weight Watchers was that old, Michael. I mean, that's some marketing they should use, right?
Well, I'm pretty old, and I think I've heard about it. I read it somewhere. I don't know. Okay.
All right, why don't we move to the Deuteronomy version of this text before we get too far flung afield? Jerry, did you have your hand raised a minute ago to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Will you read this for us, please?
Sure. And the Lord said to me, hurry, go down from here at once. For the people whom you brought out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They have been quick to stray from the path that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten image. The Lord further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Let me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name from under the heaven, and I will make you a nation far more numerous than they. I started down the mountain, a mountain ablaze with fire, the 2 tablets of the covenant in my 2 hands. I saw how you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made yourselves a molten calf. You had been quick to stray from the path that the Lord had enjoined upon you. Thereupon I gripped the 2 tablets and flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes.
Thank you so much for reading. I know that the microphone wasn't quite loud enough, but everyone has it in front of them. So I hope everyone was able to either hear or be able to read it. Does anything stick out to you from this text, or the differences between that first very long text and this much shorter one?
There is no discussion between Moses and God. God doesn't threaten to destroy the whole people, but he says, Moses, I'll replace him with someone else. It isn't as strong as the other one. Also, this reminds me of a midrash, which says that God tried many times to find a people that would accept his Torah, and he failed in most cases. So God is not unusual. He's not surprised by another failure. He could go ahead and do it try another time. He's done it before. He's tried many people and they all failed. So this is just another failure.
Yeah, thanks for bringing all that in. I do want to point out, though, right here in verse 14, right? It says, I will destroy them and blot out their name from under heaven. I will make of you a nation far more numerous than they. What God is saying here is, I'll destroy these people and just start over.
Right.
Like, and so that seems pretty harsh to me. I'm going to kill all these people and just give you a new people. That feels pretty destructive to me, right? But we don't have the back and forth argument as we do in the first text. That's absolutely true.
Why is the phrase "let me alone"?
Yeah, the reason it's bold is because there is a little play on words with the Hebrew that I was originally going to bring into the Torah study, and then I decided to change my mind of what I was doing with Torah study, and I never unbolded it. So ignore that. We're not going into that today after all.
Okay.
Anything else here? What about like the way that the 2 tablets are handled? The way that it's described, like above. Sorry if I make you a little dizzy, but when we get here, it says, he became enraged and he hurled the tablets from his hand, shattered them at the foot of the mountain, as opposed to Deuteronomy. I gripped the 2 tablets and flung them away with both my hands, smashing them before your eyes. Is there a difference between these 2?
I think one of the big differences is the Deuteronomy, Moses says, I. There is, it's like all from his perspective, and he changes little things there. Like, I made sure I was right in front of you so that you really saw me throw these tablets away.
Isn't it also true that the stones that were destroyed were actually saved and put in the ark later on?
Yes. There's a lot of midrashim about that, which is basically kind of later commentaries based on that. And the idea is that in the end, the ark will contain both the shattered pieces of tablets and the whole tablets that are later given to the Jewish people. And there's a lot of power in that, I think.
Yes, it just to remind the people of what God could have done and what he didn't do. So it's amazing.
Right. Or to remind us that we're imperfect, and perhaps there's holiness even in our imperfections.
Yes.
Right. There's a lot of power in all of that.
Those first set of stones the first set of stones were carved by the finger of God. The second set of stones were Moses carved.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. Sari, is there something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just wondering regarding the way he smashed it or threw it at the edge, of the mountain. I don't know if he's just so angry, he's not even thinking carefully about it. He's just reacting, and he smashes it, and flung them. and the other one is more purposeful. I don't know if that's the case, but it's a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely it seems more thought through in the second text than in the first one, which is talking about him being enraged. We don't have emotion discussed in the second one. You're absolutely right.
Could it be again that this is one of those instances where the authors, there were two authors, and then one wrote it one way and another wrote it another way, and somehow they elected to put it in?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. If we look at Friedman's book of where he distinguishes between who wrote different parts of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy is definitely written by its own unique author or authors. So that is absolutely the case, Irv.
Okay.
I'm kind of thinking, reading this, we never see very much compassion towards the people about how frightened they must have been, how lost they were in a new land, how new this entire situation is. I'm kind of struck by that today. They sin, they sin, they sin, they sin. I get that. And then you go back to what you know, which is, when you're afraid and like what has worked before, you do tend to go to it, and you tend to go to the known as opposed to the unknown.
There is so much power in what you just said, Rabbi Catherine, right? Because this first text, we do have a glimpse of this compassion and this love that Moses has for the people. And the second one, it's you made mistakes, people. Like we're not getting that. And it all goes to the perspective that we're bringing to a story really changes it an awful lot, right?
Where's the part when the mountain was held on top of all the people? Isn't that somewhere close?
Oh, that's a midrash as well. That's not from the Torah.
It's not part of it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that has to do with when we're given the Torah. That's based on Exodus 20 is what that is.
Okay.
So I want to bring in this one little midrashic text. Midrash is basically later commentary on the Torah, trying to fill in the gaps. And it says, it's quoting from Ecclesiastes, words that we might know very well because we have the song, at least I do every time I read this. I have the song in the back of my head, to everything turn, turn, right? It says, there is a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. This is applicable to Moses. There was a time for him to cast away tablets and a time to have new ones.
New ones.
A few new ones. Yes, thank you. So I never seen it in that context before of bringing in that Ecclesiastes verse. So maybe you have, but I hadn't come across it before. So I thought I'd just bring it in here. Looking at the time, why don't we continue with the story? We don't have a whole lot left in it. Would anyone like to read this next piece from Exodus 32? Yes, sorry, that'd be great. And then Steve, I'd love you to read the next piece.
He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such great sin upon them? Aaron said, let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil.
I'm going to say something to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ezra.
I think it would be kind of mean if you were at a friend's house and you didn't like their dog and you did that to the dog, or I don't know. It's like we were hearing a dog every night go barking and barking. You don't go to neg their neighbor, right? And their dog. So it's kind of a mean thing to do. But I guess if you're done with someone, I mean, I can't deal with it. I guess it's a way to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, remember, this isn't like a living being. This is the idol that was created. That's what the calf is.
Right.
But you're right that there is like a mean element of this. Absolutely. I mean, grounding it down and making the Israelites drink it, that's not exactly the most pleasant experience in the world.
But it could be as nice. I mean, it could be, you know,
Help make you regular.
be mean, but also.
Maybe he's just trying to appease God.
Yeah, it could be, right? We don't know so much of the emotions and the thought behind any of that. We don't get any of that insight. It's not like reading a novel. So it might not be as bad as it's made to sound.
All right.
Steve, will you read this section from Deuteronomy that corresponds to the other one?
I'd be happy to. I threw myself down before the Lord, eating no bread and drinking no water for 40 days and 40 nights as before, because of the great wrong you had committed, doing what displeased the Lord and vexing him. For I was in the dread of the Lord's fierce anger against you, which moved him to wipe you out. And that time, too, the Lord gave heed to me. Moreover, the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I also interceded for Aaron at that time.
And that's the only mention of Aaron in this story in Deuteronomy. Okay, that's the mention that we have.
Do we know what really happened to Aaron? Did he have a natural death, or what happened to Aaron?
Yeah, he was gathered to his fathers, is what it's worded.
Yes.
He what? I'm sorry. What was that?
He was gathered to his people. He lived a long life.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some commentaries that say it's because of this that he wasn't allowed to enter the promised land. But that's one of many ideas.
You know, the people don't get off scot-free. God does bring a plague among the people, and he also sends out people to put people to the sword. So they don't get off scot-free.
They certainly don't. There is a bit of a difference in the two texts about how the punishment takes its, like how it actually happens.
Right.
If God is an all-knowing God, he should have known, he would have known that all of this was going to happen. And therefore, this tends to become a test rather than an event.
Yeah. There's a lot of big theological questions you're bringing up today, Michael, and I have an inner like desire to just kind of fly with him and go there, but I also realize that we have 13 minutes left in class. So I would love to explore those. I'll have to figure out a way to bring them in because they're really great questions. I really appreciate them.
But God did give us free choice. And that's what they were exercising, their choice. Sometimes we make bad choices. In fact, oftentimes we make bad choices.
Right. And sometimes it's only through making those bad choices that we can actually learn and grow.
Exactly.
So I want to point out a couple things that occurred to me this time in reading the text. I mean, every time I read a text of Torah, there's something different that pops out to me. I'm not sure if you all have the same experience, but it certainly is mine. And one of the things that really became abundantly clear to me was this focus on food as it appears within the story, right? And I want to kind of compare and contrast within the two stories how food and drink actually have this central role. And part of it is like, we know this ongoing joke about all Jewish holidays fall under this idea. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Right? Like food is a big part of our experience. There's no doubt about it. We love our food and drinks, and we should, right? There's a lot of beauty in those traditions. So I think it's not coincidental that food and drink play a pivotal role within this particular text of our tradition. A text whose core line from Exodus actually ends up playing a really important role in the liturgy on Yom Kippur. where we read aloud one of the names of God, calling on God to be compassionate. That comes from Exodus. So especially that food piece also can come in. But these are 4 times that food makes its appearance, twice in the Exodus story, where people offer up burnt offerings. They sit down to eat and drink and rise to dance. That happens right after they create the golden calf. And then later in the story, Moses took the calf, burnt it, ground it into powder, and strewed it upon the water to make the Israelites drink it. That's the other way that it appears in the story of Exodus. By contrast, in Deuteronomy, food and drink occurs through the perspective of Moses, where Moses says, I stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, eating no bread and drinking no water. And I threw myself down before the Eternal, eating no bread and drinking no water for 40 days and 40 nights as before. So I fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And then I came down, saw you were worshiping an idol, and I did it for 40 more days and 40 nights in order to bring down God's anger and to show kind of loyalty and commitment to God and to atone for the Israelite sins. So what do we make of this contrast between the two?
Yeah, the people are eating and Moses isn't.
Yeah, the people are not only eating, but they're rejoicing and celebrating.
They are feasting. Yeah.
Well, I think it shows resilience too, doesn't it? That the people can, in spite of their terror, fears, they can still rejoice. So that says something about the resilience of our people.
Rabbi, what's the timeline here? Where are we from Egypt, from leaving Egypt to this point?
Not very far.
Okay, so these folks just may be going back to their old habits.
Yes, absolutely.
Going to what they know.
So
It's not by chance that they made a calf. I mean, of all animals, that was one of the sacred animals of the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
In the book, Jews, God, and History, they portray Moses in a different character. And I almost got thrown out of a Shabbaton because I brought it up to a rabbi and said, no, that's heretical. And you know that Moses was an Egyptian prince. It's where we find him in the story. And, the myth is that he was Jewish, or selected. And the story goes, but he was an Egyptian prince who used the opportunity to lead these people. And when I mentioned that, the book, and this rabbi got very upset. And so Moses was a charismatic character, but he didn't know the language. That's where Aaron comes into the picture. In my yeshiva days, they said the story was that Moses touched something hot and went to his mouth and destroyed his ability to speak clearly. But really the interpreter was Aaron, and that was his function. He knew the language of the people. Moses didn't. And but anyway, this particular rabbi thought it was heretical. And so anyway, I'm not even sure.
Can I just
yes.
Yes, Sari, go ahead.
I'm just not even sure why I mentioned it, but except for the fact that these folks were used to living in a certain way and going to a certain backup when things weren't well. So it should not have been a surprise.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Sari.
I just wanted to finish my thought from before about resilience, that, maybe as a people, we have survived, even, through the centuries, they tried to destroy us, but, maybe because we do know how to live and there is joy in our hearts. And, so that just brings to mind, that we're a resilient people, and that's a good thing, certainly.
one of the things I wanted to bring up, so someone brought up the kind of omniscientness of God and the fact, the idea that God knows everything. How is this really, how do many of these stories then fit into the whole thing where God's kind of surprised about how, wrong everything goes? And I mean, obviously you can argue about whether there's omniscience in God, but if you do go through that argument, I suppose you can look at this almost as in itself a lesson, because like the fact that Moses wasn't supposed to just accept God and kind of be and say like, oh yeah, no, you're right, they're wrong because you're God, so just kill them all. And instead he argues against it, and he, even though it wasn't his fault, he talks about taking 40 days and 40 nights without food and water, going through suffering himself in order to help people that did something that was wrong. And again, if you're going through the omniscient argument, you could take this more as less as unexpected wrongness and more as a lesson of how to, even when you would think you should just leave people behind because they did something wrong, even something wrong by God's eyes, that maybe you should actually stick up for them and try to make your best to correct the situation, even if you weren't directly involved with it.
It's beautiful.
I was trying to make sense of your question about food, and I come to the conclusion, food allows life to exist, and food has different roles to play beyond just sustaining life. The example given, it's used to celebrate for many different things. It could be viewed as a punishment in the sense that you make something that tastes horrible, you burn the gold and mix it up with water and force people to drink it. So food is punitive. There's, for me, that dichotomy. Food's a primary reinforcer. We use it in educational circles, when we were trying to shape behavior, and we give kids M&Ms. Now maybe M&Ms are not food, I don't know, but anyway, I classify it as food. And so you withdraw that primary reinforcer when someone's not doing, as a punishment for not doing something or for doing something. And I think it's hard. I think these things represent the challenge for Moses, the human being, to deal with a really bad situation, going against everything he has learned and thought he was teaching. I think it's also, for me, understandable why people responded in the way they did, coming from the background that they had, knowing what they knew about gods and now the idea of one God. And that part of having food in one's life is also appreciating it. And when it's either taken away or not gotten, if you look contemporarily, people who lack shelter, they also lack food. And when they eat all the wrong things because that's what's available to them. Those who conscientiously, when we fast on Yom Kippur, the whole notion of food at that time takes on a different meaning for us. And what happens when fasting is over, and what are the prayers and the learnings that we say and learn? I get it. I see I'm not good enough or smart enough to do the discrepancy between the two versions of this, but I can see the importance of it.
Thank you so much, Marla. I mean, I think what you brought in is that it's all contextual, right? Depending on the context of how food is used is how we can read it, because food can be as celebratory and a symbol of strength, as you described, Sari, right? When we're looking at this text, we see that there is a kind of anger that Moses had for the feasting and rejoicing that the Israelites were doing. And we can ask the question, why? And one of the things that you can't get from this text alone is that in the Torah, there are so many stories that kind of like flow into one another, and people have a resonance. So like if food comes up, people think about all the other times in the Torah where food comes up. And obviously there's a lot of them, but there's one in particular that comes to mind that I didn't include in my sheet. And it's the story of Joseph. Do you remember, if you studied this before, in the story of Joseph, when all of his brothers throw him into a pit, and he's in the pit and he's crying out for help. He's in this pit. His brothers just threw him in there and are trying to figure out whether they're going to kill him, if they're going to sell him, what they're going to do to him. And what is it that they do? They feast and they rejoice. And the Hebrew words for these things are the very same words that are being used here. So what the parallel that's going on here, that it's hard to tell just from reading the text, is that the people are feasting and rejoicing. Not that the feasting and rejoicing is a bad thing. It's a great thing. It's a part of our culture. We should do that. But that the context is not appropriate for the feasting and rejoicing at this moment. And the reason that Moses says, drink this, is because Moses is saying, you wanted to feast so much? Here, have this celebratory thing. And it's kind of like a little, shiv in the side kind of thing in a way. But essentially, when we look at these two texts, we see two very different stories that are attuned to different perspectives of the same pivotal Jewish event. And I think the underlying message in reading these and studying these is one of attunement. That if Moses could be attuned to the feelings of the people, perhaps there didn't need to be so much anger. That if the people could be more attuned to everything that Moses was doing on their behalf, perhaps they could be more patient. And if God could be more attuned to everyone there, perhaps God wouldn't have so much anger as well. That perhaps if we can take the time to see things from one another's perspectives, then things can calm down quite a lot and we can really appreciate one another. So I'm looking at the time and it's already 1:31, meaning I already went over. But your comments and your thoughts on all of this have been so profound, and I'm so grateful for all of these. And Leanne, I hope we didn't completely scare you today with all of this. But Marla, I would love if you could kind of finish this off with a blessing, if there's anything that you have over there.
I do. It's still in our book that we're reading, but I think it must be a little farther down the road a bit as things in the story changes, where it talks about Moses reminding the people that they must always remember the source of all goodness and favor. And so it's from chapter 8, verse 10, when you have eaten your fill, give thanks. So it kind of fits in with the notion we just left off with, which was about food. And this is a blessing for gratitude. When you are filled with gratitude, acknowledge the abundance in your life with thanks. Appreciate all the silent angels who made this moment of gratitude possible. Honor those who came before you, who endured and thrived, or maybe only survived. Bring your awareness to the small sacrifices and sheer good luck that makes it possible for your heart to overflow with generosity and thanks. As you remember the gifts in your life, hold on, no matter what, so that every step on your journey will bring you closer to dreams realized and promises kept.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Is it possible to send these, Marla? I mean, they're so beautiful.
To send them to
somehow, if we can, I don't want to add work to anyone, but you know what I mean? I just want to capture
beautiful.
it.
I suppose I could copy the page.
I love the things you come with.
Yeah, I mean, it's out of a book. I don't know if that's plagiarism or not, but I guess let me think about that. I'll run it by Rabbi Cassi. Maybe two heads make a brain, and we'll figure out a way to accommodate you. That's very sweet.
Yeah, or see if we can find some copies of the book so that everyone can enjoy
them. It's
them.
a struggle. I think it was Michael bought it. What did he pay? Something like $75 or something ridiculous, So yeah.
Oh, we'll see.
Yeah.
But thank you all so much for a wonderful Torah study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you. Actually, next week, hold on one second. Next week, Rabbi Catherine has so beautifully offered to lead everyone in Torah study because I'm going to be up at camp for the next 2 weeks, so I won't be able to lead. On the 12th, we do not currently have someone to lead. So if you would like to, it doesn't have to be a super complex Torah study. It could be very simple, just kind of walking through this text together. I think you're all theologians, so you certainly could do that. But if anyone would like to lead that discussion, please let me know so that we can make sure you have any support that you need. Thank you all so much.
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you all next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same here, Ken.